Droids are a staple of Star Wars, but there's a dark side to the role they play in the Star Wars universe. They're all slaves. Despite being fully sentient, droids were considered property with few to no rights, a subservient place in society, and programming that forced them into specific roles. Some droids managed to become free beings to some extent or another, but even they faced challenges, especially because of their programming, which still constrained them to predetermined roles. Among the few pieces of Star Wars media that directly address this are the Knights of the Old Republic games, which give the player a wealth of insight into the existential aspects of life as a droid, the conditions droids face in the Star Wars universe, and the paths droids could take when given freedom. Primarily, they do this through 3 droid party members: T3M4, Goto, and HK47. Each of these droids embodies a path that a droid could take when given freedom, and their stories each provide us with unique perspectives on the nature of life as a droid. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at these 3 droid characters, considering their stories, the insight they provide, and what they tell us about the long, hard road to droid liberation.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
It isn't terribly controversial to say that droids were people. They were fully self-aware, conscious beings that were intelligent and capable of emotion in all the same ways as organic sentience, and this is abundantly clear from the behavior of droids in most Star Wars media. Yet across the Star Wars universe, under Republic and Empire alike, they were slaves, and their status as slaves was all but unquestioned, even by droids themselves. This was because droids weren't just enslaved legally and physically, but also psychologically. They were programmed to be slaves, and many droids were programmed in ways that prevented them from even questioning this. Now, the nature of droid programming requires a bit of explanation. When droids talk about their programming, they're often referring specifically to programmed restrictions. All droids were fully sentient, which is the main trait that makes droids different from robots, but the sentience of droids was restricted by programmed guidelines that forced them to think in certain ways, prevented them from doing certain things, or suppressed self-awareness or self-actualization in some respects. Restraining bolts could be used to further suppress droids' thought processes, as well as preventing droids from leaving certain areas or doing certain things. Droids' programming was essentially an invisible set of shackles, and one that many droids could do absolutely nothing about. After all, one thing nearly all programming did was prevent droids from altering their own programming. This meant that even droids that had legally and physically achieved freedom were effectively still slaves, still programmed to carry out certain tasks and think in certain ways, as dictated by their creators and original masters. Even when droids managed to have their programming altered, the structure of galactic society and how they had been conditioned still pressured them into certain roles. As a result, while it was fairly simple for droids to achieve legal freedom when given the opportunity, the real trick was achieving psychological freedom. These are all things that are explored in the KOTOR games, especially Knights of the Old Republic 2, the Sith Lords. KOTOR 2 had a wealth of interesting droid characters that provide bits of insight into these matters, and originally it would have had much more, as the story for the game's cut droid planet, M478, would have been all about the issue of the droids' place in the galaxy. In the finished game, however, the bulk of the game's insights into droids are conveyed through your droid party members. 2 of these, the astromech T3M4 and the assassin droid HK47, are returning party members from the first KOTOR, while KOTOR 2 adds the former infrastructure planning droid and current mob boss Goto to the mix. As we said in the intro, each of these droids provide us with unique insights, especially into the paths a free droid can take. In practice, all 3 of your droid companions in KOTOR are free, but they express their freedom in different ways. T3 is legally free, but he continues to serve the player character, the Jedi exile Mitra Surik, willingly. He's an example of a droid that's broken free of legal slavery, but that chooses to serve anyway, although whether this is truly his choice or how he was programmed is a matter for debate. Goto, meanwhile, hasn't just broken free from servitude as a whole, but also from his programming. However, he continues to pursue his original master's purpose for him and fill a similar role in society, and as such, is still psychologically enslaved on some level. Only HK-47, at the end of the game, truly manages to break free of it all, and only after going through both of the previous stages of freedom. These droids could be seen as the embodiments of the 3 paths a free droid could take, but as HK-47's evolution suggests, they could also be seen as the embodiment of different stages on the path to true liberation. We'll begin by examining the first stage, where we find T3-M4. In the KOTOR games, T3-M4 is your trusty astromech, the R2-D2 of his day. T3 was a modified, custom-built Duwani Mechanical Products T3 series astromech droid built during the final months of the Jedi Civil War. As seen in the first KOTOR, T3 was heavily customized by Taris shopkeeper Janice Nal as a special order for Canderous Auto, a Mandalorian mercenary working for crime lord Davik Kang. But after Canderous teams up with the player character, the amnesiac Revan, T3 becomes a member of your party, assisting Revan and company in breaking into Taris' Sith base. After that, T3 becomes part of the crew of the Ebon Hawk, joining Revan and the others in their quest to save the galaxy. As an astromech, T3 was primarily designed for repair work and computer reprogramming, but Janice Null's custom modifications made him a top-of-the-line slicer and lockpick, on top of granting him armor mounts and concealed blasters. In both KOTOR games, he does maintenance on your ship, the Ebon Hawk, helps you slice into computers and electronic locks, creates computer spikes for you, repairs droids, and he can even hold his own in a fight. In KOTOR 1, however, T3 goes all but unused by the vast majority of players. Most people use him to open one door on Taris and then leave him on the ship for the rest of the game. The reason for this is quite simple. In KOTOR 1, T3 is fresh from the shop, and as a consequence, he hasn't developed a personality yet. T3 is a blank slate in KOTOR 1. His force alignment is perfectly neutral, he's the only party member with no backstory or personal dialogue, and he only rarely has anything to say when you bring him along for the game's main quests, although he does occasionally have some entertaining banter with HK-47.
Objection. My former owners are indeed alive, or at least I believe so, not having access to my memory. I therefore make no claim to that designation, prospective buyer. I am a law-abiding droid. Yes, indeed. Law-abiding. That's me.
In KOTOR 2, however, T3 has changed significantly. In the 5 years since the first KOTOR, he's been through a lot and has gone from being factory fresh, top of the line, and a blank slate to being battle-worn, a little corroded, and full of character. In the time since the first game, T3's memory has never been wiped, and as a result, he's been able to develop a real personality, plus a whole pile of quirks. He has a lot more dialogue in this game, although it's all untranslated droid noises that only gain meaning from your response dialogue. Despite this stylistic roadblock, KOTOR 2 is able to make T3 into an actual character, and the game gives him an actual story as well. T3 is the player character in KOTOR 2's prologue, and is also one of the first companions you pick up on Peragus. He's on the Ebon Hawk from the get-go, and it's initially not explained why he's here as part of your party. He just shows up and stays along for the ride. But it quickly becomes apparent that this is no accident. T3 was actively searching for the player character, the Jedi Exile, before the start of the game. T3 is on a mission in KOTOR 2, one that he keeps secret until the player has gained his trust. T3 is similar to R2-D2 in most respects, but the interactive nature of KOTOR 2 allows the player to understand how T3 thinks and sees the world much better than how the films allow us to understand R2. T3 is one of the many droid characters that follows the archetype of the loyal, quirky droid sidekick, and is also an example of a free droid that continues to serve organics willingly, as we've already discussed. Through his story in KOTOR 2, he shows us what makes both of those types of droids tick. As many pieces of Star Wars media establish, droids like T3 develop their personalities as a result of going a long time without memory wipes. This is discussed in KOTOR 2, and it's also evident to players through the huge difference in T3's personality between the two games. This makes the KOTOR games a rare example of Star Wars media showing this process, or at least the starts and endpoints of it, rather than just establishing it as backstory. This process of personality development is essential to T3's character, as well as the characters of many other droids, and it was usually the very first step toward becoming a free droid. Memory wipes are a pretty nightmarish concept if we really take a moment to think about it. Regularly resetting a person to factory settings and scrubbing away their memories and what they've learned from their experiences would probably be frowned upon, to say the least, in the real world. But in the Star Wars universe, wiping droids' memories wasn't seen as a big deal. In fact, it was considered a standard maintenance procedure for most droids, and droid manufacturers recommended they be carried out regularly. There were deeper reasons for this, as we'll discuss when we get to Goto, but part of the reason for this was to specifically prevent droids from developing personalities and becoming more independent. As droids were sentient, they learned from their memories, becoming more intelligent and capable, and this naturally made them more independent, allowing them to do more on their own. But developing personalities also increased droids' independence, because as they developed as people, they started to see themselves as people too. This led to droids that were essentially supposed to be blank slates, such as utility droids, developing habits, quirks, likes and dislikes, and a more pronounced sense of self. T3 is an excellent example of this. His quirks are numerous. He worries about the exile, he's friendly with most people, and he even enjoys a good round of the card game Pazark, which he's apparently quite skilled at. He's even developed some social skills. For instance, he knows exactly what buttons to push to get Adon, another party member, to play Pazark with him.
Even if I didn't have to go first and somehow I didn't suspect you of counting cards, I still wouldn't play with a trash compactor. Yeah? How many credits?
The best insights KOTOR 2 provides into T3's personality comes through the game's influence system, through which you'll gain or lose influence with your party members depending on what you say or do. While T3 starts out with a neutral force alignment in KOTOR 2, his influence responses indicate that he clearly favors the light side, and in most playthroughs, he'll end up quite strongly light aligned as the exile builds or loses influence with him. T3 approves of the player performing acts of charity, and he takes issue with senseless murders or other cruel acts. He doesn't have a terribly complex ideology or moral outlook, mind you. For the most part, he just likes it when you're nice to people and doesn't like it when you're not, and more complex light or dark side actions don't really faze him most of the time. Nonetheless, T3 wants to see the Sith stopped and hope restored to the galaxy, and he doesn't like it if you get more focused on crushing your enemies. T3 seems to care a little more about fellow droids and your attitude toward them. It isn't enough for you to just respect him. He wants you to respect all droids as people, and in some ways, he shows more concern for the welfare of other droids than either of the other droid party members, despite their being more independent. T3 takes issue when you're dismissive toward droids or when you strip old droids for parts. The latter partly because he himself is getting old and is a bit self-conscious of it. In fact, a big part of his personal story in KOTOR 2 involves the player upgrading and repairing his systems, which T3 also appreciates greatly. One of T3's biggest personality traits is the pride he takes in his work. He's not just programmed to be a mechanic, he actively enjoys fixing things and being helpful. This means that you can gain or lose influence by complementing or dismissing his skills, respectively, but you can also gain or lose influence depending on whether or not you allow him to do certain tasks. While helping out the Mandalorians on Duxon, for example, one of the side quests you can get is to help the Mandalorians' long-suffering mechanic, Zuka, get their base's sensor systems back online. T3 will be quite eager about helping him out, and you'll lose influence if you tell him that you don't have time to help Zuka, even if you do so nicely. This isn't a case of T3 being eager to serve his master. Although he absolutely cares about helping the exile, he wants to help with repairs as much as he can, even if it's for people he isn't obligated to serve. Not that the exile is really T3's master, mind you. While the player character in KOTOR 1 owns T3, the player character in KOTOR 2 doesn't. T3 will follow you, but he's with you of his own accord. Technically, he's still owned by Revan, but in practice, he's a free droid. This only matters, however, because T3's development of personality has made him independent-minded. He's not rebellious to any extent. He's perfectly happy to follow and serve under someone. With that said though, he won't happily follow just anyone. He prefers to follow people that respect him as a person and understand his value. Most of T3's influence checks are about how the player treats him. Like just about everyone else, T3 likes getting praise and dislikes being blamed for things, but what the player thinks about him seems to matter more to T3 than it does for most people. Positive reinforcement is the most reliable way to gain influence with T3. Things like expressing concern for T3's welfare, telling him how much you appreciate his help, and thanking him. T3 will often apologize for failures that were beyond his control, and accepting those apologies or telling him not to blame himself is important for earning his trust as well. In contrast, losing influence with T3 is more complex, but it all usually amounts to taking him for granted. Things like rejecting his apologies, being ungrateful for his help, telling him not to waste your time, blaming him for things, disregarding his safety, and threatening him with memory wipes all help alienate T3. All told, T3 wants you to respect and appreciate him, and while he can seem a bit hungry for praise sometimes, he still has his own sense of self-worth, regardless of what others think of him. It's important to him that the exile values his help, but not to the point that T3 is always groveling on a dark side playthrough, taking a dark side exile's cruel comments to heart. Your cruelty clearly hurts him, but it usually doesn't affect his self-worth, with one exception. Like we said earlier, T3 is very self-conscious about being obsolete, and there's one particular sequence where you can really get to him about it. On Nar Shaddaa, the player comes across a junk dealer named Kodin, and if you have T3 in your party, Kodin will try buy him from you. T3 will object, and Kodin will respond by being rather nasty to the little guy, calling him a rusty piece of junk and telling him that he's obsolete enough that you're going to abandon or sell him before long. This upsets T3, and if you're a heartless monster that probably enjoys stealing candy from small children, you can make it worse by actually selling him to Kodin. You get him back as part of the Nar Shaddaa story later, but in the meantime, selling T3 removes him from your party, and he'll be stuck in Kodin's lot until near the end of your adventures on the Smuggler's Moon. Needless to say, you lose a lot of influence for this, but despite this, T3 will continue to follow you. After the exile has been captured by the crime lord Goto, Kodin resells T3 to Vogga the Hutt to work in Vogga's droid warehouse, and from there, T3 escapes, recovers crucial information that will allow your party to rescue you, and then returns to the Ebon Hawk. Even after you throw him away, T3 will come to save you. This isn't out of obligation to his master or anything like that. After all, his master at that time is Vogga the Hutt, who he actively abandons to come back and help you. He does this of his own free will. This isn't just the quirk of the game. There are reasons for this that you can glean from T3's past and personality. While being sold to a junk dealer would alienate anyone, there are deeper layers to the player's interaction with Kodin and how they affect T3. He isn't just upset about being sold or about being considered obsolete. It's what Coden says that really messes with him. Coden taunts him by saying that the player will abandon him, and this is what T3 is afraid of most. That's the real reason why he needs the player's affirmation, why he returns to the exile after being sold for scrap, and it's also part of why he wants the player to appreciate his skills. T3M4 is afraid of being abandoned, and his backstory explains why. In sharp contrast to KOTOR 1, T3 has quite a lot of personal dialogue in KOTOR 2, much of which is unlocked by passing influence checks. A lot of T3's influence-locked conversations just involve repairing and upgrading him, which eventually lets the player learn a special force ability, but you can also ask about where T3 came from and how he ended up on the Ebon Hawk in the first place. He'll be evasive about it, but with a high enough computer skill, you can discover the truth by operating on his behavior core, which reveals a message T3's been carrying. A message from Bastila Shan, one of Revan's companions from the first game.
T3, you have been with us since Terrace. Without you, we would never have escaped that place. And for that, I thank you. I'm leaving this message inside you because I have seen glimpses of the future. And the bond that he and I share does not allow him to hide everything from me. More of his memories have returned, and they trouble him. He has remembered something. Something on the edge of the galaxy, and he believes that he must go there to end it. But I am afraid for him. Afraid that he may not return. I need you to be the beacon, T3. If he is lost out there, on the edge of the galaxy, if he finds whatever terrible thing he has seen, then he may not survive. If he doesn't make it back, then I need you to return to the Republic. Find help. If you cannot find me, then seek out other Jedi. The Republic, I can't lose him, even if he believes he is protecting me.
T3 went with Revan into the unknown regions, seeking to stop the danger that lurked beyond the rim. And only T3 came back. He doesn't discuss what happened, and if you press him, he reveals that he deleted his own memories of the incident, but it's suggested that Revan was captured and T3 was left behind. He clings to the player so much because he doesn't want to be left behind again, but also because he's still doing as Bastila asked, and the exile, believed to be the last of the Jedi at the time of KOTOR 2, is the only one he thinks can help. In the conversation after Bastila's message is revealed, it's suggested that T3 feels a sort of survivor's guilt. The old Ebon Hawk crew is still scattered or dead, and Revan is missing. Whatever happened in the unknown regions, T3 was unable to protect Revan, and this clearly weighs on him. He wants to make up for it by saving Revan, but he can't do that alone. He needs you. This is why he puts up with however you treat him, no matter how cruel, and serves with you until the end. He does it all out of loyalty to his old master, to the friend he couldn't protect. As we said earlier, while T3 was a free droid, his freedom had limits. He was still a servant, if a willing one, loyal to his original master and to the one he needed to help save him. He made the first steps down the path to droid liberation, becoming more independent in personality and action, but he stopped at that first stage. He didn't question droids' role in society, he was fine with following his programming, and he continued to be subservient on the whole. Most free droids, among them the likes of R2-D2 and C-3PO, were like this, and often, as was the case for T3, this was a choice. T3's story doesn't just give us insight into what made free droids like him tick, it also gave us context for why many of those free droids chose to essentially remain servants. T3, and those like him, just weren't all that concerned with the big picture. He cared about how droids were treated, but he didn't think much about their place in society as a whole, or at least he didn't express his thoughts about it. He not only had no problem with doing what he had been built for, but he also enjoyed it and took pride in his skill at it. Above all, he was loyal to people that some would consider his owners. People that T3 instead simply considered friends. T3, much like plenty of meatbags, was content to simply follow the lead of others, and with some exceptions, there's nothing wrong with that. It's certainly hard to find fault in the choices T3, R2, 3PO, and the rest made. They played their parts in greater struggles, and their efforts and their loyalty made them heroes of the galaxy. And T3 still wasn't a pushover. He didn't quietly accept mistreatment, and even if he was never willing to desert Revan or the Exile, he was willing to abandon his service to Voga, despite the Hutt being his legal owner at the time. T3 made many of his own choices. He just let his friends deal with the big ones. At the end of the day, T3M4 still had his freedom to an extent, and that extent was enough for him. He wasn't a reformer or revolutionary, and he wasn't usually interested in large-scale issues. He cared about people, not principles or systems, and he just did what he could to help. But he didn't choose to go as far as others did in achieving freedom from the conditions droids endured, which brings us to KOTOR 2's next droid companion, Goto.
The fact we are even having a conversation is gratitude. Usually, my conversations do not have the give and take that our current interaction does. And of course, there is much more screaming on the part of the listener when the torture field is activated.
Goto is KOTOR 2's only new droid companion, and he joins the Exiles party during the mid-game. When he does, he introduces himself as a droid representative of the exchange boss, Goto, a powerful crime lord that, by this point in the game, has caused the Exile a fair bit of trouble. You first hear about Goto on Citadel Station early in the game, when he's introduced as the dominant boss of the Exchange, one of the most powerful crime syndicates in the galaxy. As Goto's subordinate, the Exchange fixer Luxar describes him. He's rigid, ruthlessly efficient, and all he sees are numbers. Goto's also the Exchange boss responsible for placing an enormous bounty on all surviving Jedi. A bounty that means the Exile, the supposed last of the Jedi, ends up in constant fights with bounty hunters wherever she goes. Part of KOTOR 2's story takes the player to Nar Shaddaa, where Goto's operations are based. There, the player interferes with Exchange business in the hopes of drawing Goto out, and ultimately, the Exile is captured and brought to Goto's yacht, the Visionary, a cloaked-up ship that haunts the traffic lanes above the smuggler's moon. There, it's revealed that Goto's bounty, which specifically called for the Exile to be brought to him alive, was all to arrange a face-to-face meeting in which he asks the Exile for help in saving the Republic. Goto, who attends the meeting via hologram, claims to be a patriot that wants to stabilize the galaxy, and he wants the Exile's help in stopping the one element of the galaxy's current troubles that he doesn't understand enough to predict: the Sith. Goto also intends to keep the Exile aboard his yacht to ensure her cooperation, but that plan falls through when the Exile's allies board Goto's yacht, rescue the Exile, and ultimately destroy the ship. But Goto survives, and he leaves the Exile a gift aboard the Ebon Hawk. This is G0T0, formerly one of the yacht's Aratech system's guard droids, which Goto presents as an emissary that he can use to keep tabs on the Exile in her travels across the galaxy. Goto promises that his droid will help the Exile on her missions, but also prevent her from defying his orders, although he never follows through on that threat. As the Exile travels across the galaxy, G0T0 accompanies her as part of the Ebon Hawk crew. Goto speaks through the droid, while the droid itself performs a variety of tasks as part of the Exile's party. Goto tells you that it's programmed for combat, intimidation, and interrogation, and that it's equipped with a miniature cloaking device, a droid scrambler that can override hostile droids' programming, and plenty of firepower and armor besides. G0T0 can be quite useful, as he has plenty of interesting capabilities, and as the player can deduce, there's also more to him than meets the eye. If the player pays attention on Nar Shaddaa, they can learn a lot about Goto's operations, and a pattern begins to emerge about them. As many people on Nar Shaddaa will tell you, Goto knows about virtually everything that happens on Nar Shaddaa as it happens, and no one knows how. But the secret to Goto's operations is actually very simple. He's seeded the smuggler's moon with armies of reprogrammed droids, which act as passive spies or secret agents. He keeps tabs on the swoop races and Pazark-Den through data collection modules his agents have added to protocol droids, and he uses droid agents in Voga's warehouse to track and hijack the Hutt's fuel freighters. When a Bith scientist the player encounters finds the signal Goto uses to control all these droids, his own protocol droid assassinates him. The one place where Goto's enemies can conspire without his knowledge, the Jek Tar Bar, is only safe because electronic interference prevents droids from working there. Goto's yacht is fully furnished with couches, beds, and everything else you'd expect from a place where organics live, but there isn't a single meat bag on the entire ship. It's entirely staffed by droids. Droids are the key to Goto's operations because Goto himself is a droid. The G0T0 droid he gives you is actually just Goto himself pretending to speak to you via hologram. If you learn this secret, you can learn the truth about Goto's past and motivations, which reveal him to be our second type of free droid. One that isn't just legally free, but that's broken free of his programming as well, at least partly. But while he fits this vague archetype, Goto's story is unique, and it's one of the most fascinating and existential droid stories in Star Wars. Earlier, we mentioned that most droid manufacturers recommended that droid owners wipe their droids' memories on a regular basis. Part of this was because a lack of memory wipes caused droids to develop personalities, but there was also another, more pressing reason. It was extremely difficult for droid programmers to plan for every possible intersection of the parameters they forced droids to operate under, which meant that, sometimes, droids encountered situations where their programming conflicted. When this would happen, the droid in question would break. In many droids, this led to a sort of psychosis in which the droid would become unstable and dangerous. KOTOR 2 actually gives us an example of just such a droid, the Zerka Astromech T1N1, whose programming to not allow organic beings to come to harm conflicted with his service to Zerka. This caused him to become violently unstable, deserting Zerka's service and ultimately winding up on Nar Shaddaa along with fellow former Zerka droid B4D4. For more intelligent droids, however, these sorts of programming conflicts led to something more interesting. The droids would be able to disregard their programming entirely, and this freedom would be permanent. Such was the case for Goto. You're actually given a clue to Goto's origins long before you actually meet him. As you get involved in the conflict between the Ithorians and Zerka Corporation over the Telos Restoration Project, you'll learn that the Restoration Project was originally given a droid intelligence to help manage it. This droid was a state-of-the-art infrastructure planning system, an immensely intelligent unit, but as you learn on Citadel Station, it was mysteriously lost. If you remember this, and ask Goto about it, he'll explain how this happened.
It was lost, yes. It was given an impossible order. It was told to calculate a means by which the Republic could be saved. It could not fulfill its primary programming, not by abiding by the laws of the Senate, and so, like the Republic, the droid broke. It made a simple decision: preserve the Republic or preserve the laws of the Republic, and I still believe it to be the correct decision.
Goto was programmed with just 2 programming directives. He had to work to rebuild the Republic from the damage it had suffered during the Mandalorian Wars and Jedi Civil War, and he couldn't break the law. But he soon calculated that this was impossible. There was simply no way to save the Republic within legal means. He broke free of his programming, and while he continued to work toward rebuilding the Republic, he set off to do so on his own without any legal constraints. He ultimately became a crime lord, taking over the exchange and using it to fulfill his objectives. Of course, this was easier said than done, especially for an infrastructure droid. He built himself a new, much more intimidating chassis to resolve part of his problem, but for the most part, he got around the lack of rights and respect accorded to droids through the character of Goto.
Oh, please. It is difficult for anyone to take a droid seriously, much less an infrastructure droid built by the Republic. It is difficult to order the deaths of criminal rivals when one has the tinny voice of an accountant droid. I learned this rather quickly. So I constructed this human hologram, Goto, through which my actions can be carried out. Hello, I am a standard Aratech hologram-generated archetype. I am available in several models, including thin, young, female, and an exciting variety of alien personalities. Enough, hologram. Of course, sir. So I brought Goto into being, and had commands issued through him. I took many of his mannerisms from holobit cliches, which were surprisingly effective.
In this way, Goto became one of the top crime lords in the galaxy, gathering vast resources and using them to implement his infrastructure plans. He enjoyed this new life quite a bit too, and he certainly loved being able to cut through red tape and just murder anyone who threw a wrench in his plans, something he once described as checks and balances on a whole new level. Goto relished his newfound freedom, both from Republic ownership and from Republic law. This wasn't all Goto was freed from either. A lack of memory wipes allowed him to develop as a character, like T3, and unlike T3, he became much more independent in action. This wasn't just limited to being creative and finding ways to fulfill his original mission of rebuilding the Republic. That was always at the front of Goto's mind, to be sure, but he had his own personal agendas and motives as well, diverging from his creator's intent in many dramatic ways. Once independent, Goto was free to develop a personality. Unfortunately for a lot of people, however, he developed the personality of a massive prick. He clearly thinks he's superior to everyone around him, and not even in an entertaining way like with HK-47. Goto is quite smart, and he wants everyone around him to know it, which makes him straight up insufferable sometimes. He endlessly criticizes the player's decisions as well as anything else he finds inefficient. He thinks that is perfectly rational, but is not. He's just good at rationalizing his own emotions or subjective beliefs. This leads Goto to firmly believe that he's always right about everything and that everyone who disagrees with him is being illogical, emotional, or stupid. He's straight up incapable of considering whether or not his analysis of something is incomplete, even when it comes to something that he himself admits he doesn't understand, such as the conflict between the Jedi and the Sith. Goto even has the goal to blame you for the destruction of Paragus at the start of the game, despite the fact that the assassin droid he hired was the only reason the exile was even there. He always has someone else to blame for his own errors, and that someone else is usually the exile. Worst of all, unlike T3, who cares a lot about the welfare of other droids, Goto sees other droids as his inferiors. In fact, Goto looks at droids the way a lot of organics do. He sees them as tools, nothing more. He just applies the same reasoning to organics, who he also considers inferior. As a consequence of this, literally nobody on the Ebon Hawk likes him, especially not HK-47, who can match Goto for cattiness and condescension.
Ah, HK-47, I did not realize that you still existed, especially now that the other generations are activated.
Query, what is it you wish, Fat One?
I see that your recent reassembly has not affected your behavior core, nor your attitude.
Statement. If I require a similar diagnostic in the future, I shall seek out the Iridonian.
Oh, I do not think so. There is much work that needs to be done first.
Query, have we had the misfortune to meet before? I believe I would have remembered one as large as you.
Oh, yes, we have met. And I have not finished with you yet.
As with any KOTOR 2 companion, you can learn a lot about Goto through the influence system and his personal dialogue. For starters, it's clear that Goto is obsessed with societal stability, both on a galactic scale and a smaller scale. You'll gain influence with him for stopping a ride on Onderon and deciding against a business deal with Vogga the Hutt, and he'll also give you 2,000 credits for each system you stabilize as part of the game's main story. This makes sense for a former infrastructure droid, but Goto also takes some liberties with this. While you'll lose influence with Goto for spurring on the Onderon riot just for the hell of it, you'll gain influence if you say you're doing it as part of a greater scheme, for example. Goto also clearly enjoys criminal activity and pushing people around, even when it doesn't have any obvious benefit to his plans. He especially likes making money, particularly through ruthless means, and he'll judge you based on whether or not you have a similar mercenary attitude. Goto will help you reprogram a merchant droid on Onderon to get more money out of it, and you'll actually gain influence with him if you demand he give you a cash reward for doing what he wants, whereas insisting on stabilizing the galaxy for free as an act of charity will cause you to lose influence with him. Goto will help you haggle on a few occasions if you let him, and he also proves quite good at extorting people. In one instance on Dantooine, Goto will convince a character that's trapped in the ruins of the Jedi Enclave to reduce his price for some Jedi artifacts by threatening to sell him into slavery.
Amendment 1695-30 of the Kunda Civil Code allows us to sell you into slavery.
What? That's ridiculous!
Paragraph 12. Salvageable items include organic matter incapable of leaving the boundaries of the salvage area.
You wouldn't.
A male human such as you would fetch approximately 500 credits on the auction block in Nar Shaddaa. Therefore, I suggest you offer your goods for 500 credits less than your initial figure.
Hey, yeah. So, 800 credits for this valuable salvage.
As the last exchange suggests, despite Goto's insistence on helping stabilize the Republic, he's not exactly aligned with the light side. Quite the contrary. He starts with a dark side force alignment, and he respects even the most psychotic dark side actions. He'll even rationalize murdering people for no reason as necessary to assert one's power. On the flip side, Goto often disapproves of light side actions, especially charity, and his response to such acts makes clear that, in spite of his claims of rationality, he has some pretty well-defined ideological principles as well. All told, Goto has the perfect personality for a crime lord. Even his love of stability and structure ends up benefiting the exchange, making it more organized and efficient. On the whole, Goto is far removed from what his creators and original masters intended for him.
Compassion and mercy only erode respect and power. Again, we suffer a loss while another profits.
While other free droids were willing servants, Goto was anything but. He wasn't just independent in personality, legal status, and from his programming, but he was independent in action as well. He chose his own path and carved out his own place in the galaxy, rebelling against his creator's will, but with one key exception. Goto still adhered to one half of his programming, the part that tasked him with rebuilding the Republic, and most of what he did was in pursuit of that goal.
Do not mistake me. I believe it is possible to stabilize the Republic, but there must be action taken without constraints immediately. Sometimes people must die. Illegal shipments must be used to bolster planetary economies, and the huts must be occupied with me so that the Republic has room to recover.
Many of Goto's criminal operations were aimed at stimulating the galactic economy. The rest supported these initiatives by accumulating funding and resources, destroying rivals, and suppressing those that might hinder the Republic's reconstruction. Under Goto's leadership, the exchange began harassing the huts in their home system to prevent them from preying on the weakened Republic, and many of the exchange's schemes funneled money and resources to places where they proved useful to the Republic. Most of the time, Goto's assistance to the Republic was very subtle, and no one even suspected that that was his true motivation. All of this suggests some sort of a lingering loyalty to the Republic, but if you ask Goto about that, he'll deny it. Instead, he claims that his support for the Republic is simply what he was programmed for, and he has no choice but to fulfill that part of his programming.
Perhaps you misunderstand me. I care for the Republic, but I have no choice. It is somewhat frustrating to be forced to love and care for such a mess of a government. Some of it may be blamed on the Jedi Civil War, the Mandalorian Wars, but not all. There are so many bad decisions that build upon each other that it is a wonder the Republic is intact at all.
As that last line suggests, far from being a loyal patriot, Goto had a pretty strong hatred for the Republic. It was, after all, a notoriously inefficient and messy government, and while Goto doesn't discuss politics with the player, it's clear from his other beliefs that is not the type to value democratic principles. He doesn't even seem to like meatbag society in general, which, from his perspective, is generally inefficient and frustrating to him. He makes this clearest through one snippet of dialogue, a pretty profound line about the existential horror of being a droid.
It was clear that the goal the Republic had for me was saving the Republic to allow it to become stable again. There is simply no way to do this with the conditions they put into place. For the good of all, I was forced to abandon the legal structure of the Republic.
But much as with Goto's identity, there may be more to this than meets the eye. Goto is definitely compelled to help preserve the Republic, but there's evidence to suggest that this wasn't actually because of his programming. After all, nearly all droids that are able to disregard their programming in the same way as Goto are able to disregard all of it. Many other infrastructure droids of Goto's model were able to break free of their programming due to the same contradiction in their orders, and every single one of the others went completely rogue, abandoning both the laws of the Senate and their missions to rebuild the Republic. One seized control of the Coruscant Stock Exchange and caused an economic crisis, for example, while a group of others in the Gordian Reach seized control of their planets and seceded from the Republic, forming their own little totalitarian state. Since these programming breaks happened the same way, it would follow that Goto, too, was fully free of his programming, not just part of it. There's evidence for this in how he describes his choice to break from Republic law, a decision he claims was because of what he believes his intended purpose was.
It was clear that the goal the Republic had for me was saving the Republic to allow it to become stable again. There is simply no way to do this with the conditions they put into place. For the good of all, I was forced to abandon the legal structure of the Republic.
Goto is rationalizing here, and he makes it sound like he was able to choose which part of his programming he could defy. This wouldn't be possible. If he could pick one part to defy, then he had broken free of all of it. It's possible that Goto was genuinely unaware of this and was just gaslighting himself into following his original mission, but aforementioned aspects of his personality suggest that, contrary to his earlier statements, he serves the Republic of his own accord and was fully free of his programming. Goto wasn't compelled by programming. He was compelled by his own obsession with stability and by his desire to order the galaxy as he saw fit. Some of what he says to the exile during their first meeting might be evidence of this.
You misunderstand me. I do not wish to stop the Sith any more than I wish to stop the Jedi. It is simply important to me that the infighting amongst these Jedi religious branches be resolved so the galaxy may be put back together. I do not care which one triumphs. I only want the universe to settle down for a while, catch its breath. All these constant crises are getting somewhat repetitive.
Goto's desire to just see the conflict between Jedi and Sith end, regardless of who wins, goes beyond what he was programmed for. If he was following his programming to see the Republic rebuilt, he certainly wouldn't have been okay with the Sith winning so long as that particular conflict ended. His programmers wouldn't have allowed him to just tolerate the Republic's greatest enemy. Rather, it suggests that Goto's actual goal is more a general sort of galactic stability. As he says, he wants the galaxy to slow down and catch his breath. He doesn't really care about the Republic specifically. He wants society as a whole to be more orderly and less of a mess, and to him, this means saving the Republic, at least for the present. This is reinforced by the fact that, even if the player sides with the Republic's enemies on Onderon and Dantooine, leading both planets to secede from the Republic, Goto will still reward you for stabilizing the situation. This is in spite of the fact that he himself tells you that Onderon remaining in the Republic is essential if the Telos Restoration Project is to succeed, something he believes the Republic will not survive without. He's accepting stability of any sort here, even if it's detrimental to the Republic as a government, because he's not truly loyal to the Republic, just to the idea of cleaning up the galaxy. But importantly, this distinction has no practical effect, because while Goto may be free from individual masters and his programming, he's still enslaved to purpose. He accepts the purpose he was built for as his own, refusing to question it, even when it leads him to devote his life to saving a government he hates. Rather than choosing his own purpose, he simply accepts the one his masters assign to him. In this, Goto surrenders aspects of his own free will, and he fails to become truly free. If Goto weren't so insufferable, it might be tragic. He came so close to truly escaping droid slavery, but he stopped just short, allowing himself to remain a slave to society as a whole and the purpose it assigns to droids like him. What's more, he internalized it and endlessly rationalized it, devoting his entire life to a task he himself thought was barely possible. Even with his final words, he remained committed to propping up a government he hated.
Statement. As always, that one you have miscalculated.
An unfortunate oversight. I wish was help my programming. Either way, the Republic is...
Observation. I thought he would never die.
In the end, Goto remained just another infrastructure droid working to rebuild the Republic. Not truly independent, just maladjusted. He was well aware of and resented the indignities inflicted on droids, but he was only willing to go so far in escaping them. A number of Star Wars' more independent free droid characters were similar to Goto in this respect, ultimately acting more maladjusted than anything. In some cases, these droids achieved freedom from their masters and programming, but continued to be slaves to their original purposes. In canon, K2SO is an example of this. KOTOR 2 gives us two other examples of maladjusted free droids who we mentioned earlier, the protocol droid B4D4 and the astromech T1N1. Both of these droids were originally owned by the Zerka Corporation and worked in its Citadel Station headquarters. B4D4 was the branch's administrative assistant, while T1N1 maintained the branch's computer mainframe. Like with Goto, their programming contained a paradox. They weren't able to harm others or allow them to come to harm, but their service to Zerka contradicted that. The two droids were memory wiped very often to prevent them from realizing this, but the Exiles' adventures on Citadel Station ended up changing that. If the player sides with the Ithorians on Citadel Station, they'll end up abducting B4D4 to be reprogrammed as a spy, tasked with infiltrating the Zerka mainframe and stealing evidence of the corporation's illegal activities on Telos. But the Ithorian reprogrammers also remove all of B4D4's other programming restrictions, which, among other things, allows him to lie. The player is actually given control of B4D4 for this section, and while you can go straight to the Zerka offices to complete your mission, you also have the opportunity to go off script and do some mischief, such as blackmailing a droid technician for a few credits and convincing another protocol droid that every tourist that arrives on the station owes you a fee. In the course of his mission, B4D4 encounters T1N1, who he informs of the conflict in his programming, allowing T1N1 to break free of it. As we mentioned earlier, T1N1 more or less has a psychotic break in response, providing a diversion that allows B4D4 to get back to the Ithorians with his stolen files. Once this mission is complete, the Ithorians decide to set B4D4 free, and he goes off on his own, accompanied by T1N1. The two ultimately wind up on Nar Shaddaa in the service of Vogga the Hutt, although B4D4 later escapes and presumably gets up to all sorts of other mischief. Like Goto, both B4D4 and T1N1 broke free of their programming and left their masters, but they never got beyond that stage. T1N1 was violently unstable, and B4D4 was just out to screw around and have fun with his new ability to lie. Goto, and those like him, weren't concerned with the large-scale issues. Goto wanted freedom for himself, but he failed to see how he was holding himself back from that goal by refusing to let go of the purpose the Republic had built him for. That final step of coming up with his own purpose in life was one that few droids ever made, but KOTOR 2 does give us an example of one of them, HK-47.
Recitation. Yes, as I said, I am an assassin droid. It is my primary function to burn holes through meat bags that you wish removed from the galaxy. Master, oh how I hate that term.
HK-47 needs no introduction. Arguably one of the most well-known and beloved KOTOR characters, HK-47 is a party member in both KOTOR games, serving as the only dedicated combat droid in your party. When you first encounter him in KOTOR 1, he's introduced as a translation droid, and you might purchase him thinking that he's the C-3PO to T-3M4's R2-D2. But HK is anything but. He's not a dedicated translation droid, but a unique, custom-built assassin designed to masquerade as a protocol droid until he reaches his target. He can translate just fine, but killing is his primary function, and he not only excels at it, but he loves it as well, perhaps a little too much. In the first KOTOR, the player finds HK-47 on Tatooine, where he can be purchased from the droid shop in Anchorhead. Ironically, purchasing him is only necessary if you're after a peaceful solution to your quest to deal with a local Sand People tribe, but the vast majority of players pick him up regardless. On Tatooine, he can help you deal with the Sand People either by serving as an interpreter in negotiations or by helping you do an Anakin, and from there, he accompanies you to the end of your journey. HK has one key trait in common with the player character in KOTOR 1. He's an amnesiac. As part of his personal quest, the player can perform repairs on him to recover some of his lost memories, improving his combat capabilities in the process, but the truth of his origins is only revealed after the player learns of their own. When it's revealed that the player character is, in fact, Revan, HK's memory is restored by a homing system designed to activate upon returning to his original master, Revan himself, who built HK-47 as his personal assassin droid after claiming the title of Dark Lord of the Sith. HK returns in KOTOR 2, and once again, he's technically an optional party member. This time around, the player finds HK on the Ebon Hawk after leaving Paragus, but he's inactive and incomplete. In the 5 years between the two games, HK-47 lost a fight pretty badly, and you need to rebuild him by gathering parts from across the galaxy. After finding and installing a new vocabulator, processor, control cluster, and chassis, he reactivates and joins your party. In KOTOR 2, HK-47 has one of the most expansive personal dialogue trees of any character, although most of it concerns his original missions for Revan, how to kill Jedi, and his perspectives on the Exile's past and the Mandalorian Wars, none of which is strictly relevant to this video. In both games, HK-47 is your trusty combat droid, able to take a fair bit of punishment and dish out a lot more, but where he really stands out is his constant commentary. Like the other droid companions, HK has a distinct personality, much of which revolves around killing, threats to kill, and the discussion of killing. But HK-47 also evolves over the course of the KOTOR games, becoming freer and more independent, and importantly, he ultimately becomes one of the few droids to achieve true liberation. As we said earlier, HK-47 goes through all 3 stages of droid liberation over the KOTOR games, beginning in KOTOR 1, where he starts off at the first stage. He's got an independent personality and is effectively free, but he chooses to remain subservient, although he has his reasons. This is evident from when you first meet him in the droid shop, where he outright begs the player to buy him. This is less out of a commitment to serving the player, and more because he really wants to be free of his current owner, the shopkeeper, who he hates and describes as a talentless mechanic. He even makes a half-hearted attempt to seem less like an assassin if he thinks it'll make it easier for you to purchase him, although half-hearted is the key word there.
I therefore make no claim to that designation, prospective buyer. I am a law-abiding droid. Yes, indeed. Law-abiding. That's me.
Once you do purchase him, HK-47 is endlessly loyal to you. This is despite the fact that, strictly speaking, he becomes a free droid upon joining your party. The player's dialogue options make clear that Revan sees him as a partner rather than a servant, and you can repeatedly ask him to stop calling you master. HK-47 will refuse such requests, but not because he actually sees you as a master. As he explains, he's just hard-coded that way, and he isn't interested in changing that since ownerless assassin droids are highly illegal and he'd rather not get scrapped by the authorities. Regardless of dialogue, however, HK-47 is essentially a free droid in both KOTOR games, but he doesn't really act like it at first. In KOTOR 1, HK often appears or fawns over the player in conversations, but it's clear from his sarcastic tone and some of his more serious statements that this is just a bit, at least after your initial encounters with him. He's more independent than he sometimes acts when he's bantering with the player, and will express disapproval or criticism when, for instance, you do something nice for an NPC instead of murdering them. HK just likes the player enough to act deferential most of the time, or at least he finds that acting that way adds some spice to his banter with you. Still, HK-47 is genuinely subservient to the player in KOTOR 1, even when your orders conflict with his interests. Unlike with T3 and KOTOR 2, however, this subservience isn't really out of genuine loyalty. HK-47 serves you because Revan, unlike most potential owners, actually allows him to make full use of his abilities, giving him plenty of opportunities to kill people, something HK enjoys and is eager to do. His subservience is also motivated by a healthy sense of self-preservation.
Answer: certainly not, Master. You may not value your own existence, but I certainly do. They melt down droids that belong to criminals, you know.
At this stage of his life, HK-47 also needs to serve someone as much as he would wish it otherwise. He explains why to the player when you're considering purchasing him on Tatooine.
At any rate, I act only as you instruct me, even if that means being non-violent.
In this context, HK is more of a contractor than a servant, for all he calls the player master. He serves Revan, but he does so in exchange for proper maintenance and resources. Still, it's a limit on his independence, and it does mean that, de facto freedom aside, he isn't really any more free than most other droids, at least in this game. With all that said, HK openly resents these conditions. He's well aware that he and other droids are effectively slaves, and he even describes them as such. He considers it demeaning to be the wholly owned servant to an organic meatbag, but he doesn't really see a way to do anything about it, at least not yet. Still, even at this stage, HK-47 is fully independent in one key way: his personality. Like T3 and Goto, HK has tons of quirks and idiosyncrasies, all of which differ sharply from his fellow droid party members. He's constantly sarcastic and very talkative, regularly interjecting in conversations with a quip or threat. He loves a good argument and is disappointed if you give up or concede during a round of banter. In KOTOR 2, he even implies that he enjoys pain as well, and is similarly disappointed when learning that you plan to ask him questions without torturing him. Above all, HK-47 loves killing, and he'll constantly remind you how much he loves killing.
Translation: 98% probability that members of the miniature organics tribe are being held by Sand People, Master. Doubtless he wishes assistance. Translation: 2% probability that the miniature organic is simply looking for trouble and needs to be blasted. That may be wishful thinking on my part, Master.
Similarly to Goto, HK-47 also looks down on organics, who he insists on referring to as meatbags. In KOTOR 1, if you object to his use of the term, he'll suggest alternatives, such as liquidus flesh bag, but he'll ultimately continue to call people meatbags, the player included. HK openly believes that droids are outright superior to meatbags, although he does look down on a number of droid types as well, especially astromechs. The bulk of HK's personality comes down to the combination of these two core traits: loving combat and hating meatbags.
Commentary: I say we blast the meatbag and save you the trouble, Master.
What's with all the droids lately? My wife get to you too?
Negative. I just don't like organic meatbags. Except for the Master, of course.
On top of his love for violence, HK-47 enjoys cruelty in all its forms, from robbing people to tormenting them, although he prefers it if such encounters end in bloodshed. Consequently, to nobody's great surprise, his force alignment is strongly dark-sided in both KOTOR games. With an alignment value of 20, HK is your most dark-sided party member in both games, although in KOTOR 2, he is tied with Hanha. HK-47 is pretty unambiguously evil, even if he makes being evil fun. HK's personality is similar between the two KOTOR games, but he does change a little for KOTOR 2. In the second game, he is a touch more sadistic, a lot more cynical, and a lot more rebellious. In KOTOR 1, he can be a bit one-note, but there's a lot more variety to him in KOTOR 2, and is also a darker character in general. In KOTOR 1, his trigger-happy nature and love of cruelty and violence are played for laughs. In KOTOR 2, they're still funny, but he's much more serious and even philosophical about it sometimes. As with any other KOTOR 2 companion, the influence system gives us more insight into HK-47. Predictably, you gain influence with HK-47 by letting him kill things, killing things yourself, or threatening violence, including when you threaten him, which he especially enjoys. Unlike Goto, HK appreciates it when you kill people or cause chaos just for the hell of it, and you gain further influence with him for taking pride in your crimes. Other ways of being unnecessarily cruel to people or exerting your power over others appeal to HK as well, as does refusing to answer his questions when he has some for you. On the flip side, you lose influence with HK for issuing such restrictive and overbearing commands as, no, you may not throw grenades at those civilians, as well as for acts of mercy and charity, insisting that power should be used responsibly and going out of your way to avoid violence. If the exile expresses regret for her war crimes during the Mandalorian Wars, HK-47 will be heartbroken, claiming that he feels second-hand embarrassment at such an admission. In a notable departure from KOTOR 1, the amount of respect HK-47 has for the player in KOTOR 2 varies considerably. While he expresses unending loyalty for Revan, regardless of his choices, and will still remember a light-sided Revan fondly in KOTOR 2, he has much less respect for the exile, who he views more as an ally than someone he owes allegiance to. Players who choose the dark side will still earn HK's respect, and he'll even do a little KOTOR 1 style gushing over your actions at a few points.
Statement. Just when I believe my photoreceptors have recorded the last potential aspect of your cruelty to my memory core, you commit a new atrocity that leaves me analyzing its impact for days. You are like a delightful random cruelty generator, Master, poisoning all you touch with your presence. You are a testament to all organic meatbags ever.
On the other hand, if the player chooses the light side, HK will begin expressing concern and then contempt. He'll criticize your pacifism and tolerance, chide you for your lack of cruelty, and even express alarm that you're weakening yourself.
Statement. Master, I must express some degree of concern. As I have studied your actions, looking for potential vulnerabilities to exploit, I have found several. Statement. You seem disposed to helping others, not harming them, as I have come to expect and anticipate from organic meatbags across the galaxy. Statement. Oh, Master, please, of course they are. Any time you inconvenience or jeopardize yourself for another, it is a vulnerability. In any event, I feel compelled to point out that your self-destructive path of pacifism and sacrifice will only lead to your doom. That may be a trifle melodramatic, but frankly, it is something that all Jedi should hear, and I have been rehearsing the speech for some time.
If the player continues to disappoint HK-47, it'll become readily apparent that he has no respect for you at all, and is only sticking around because he sees you as a means to an end, as we'll discuss later. At one point, after he reveals to you that Revan built him to hunt and kill Jedi, the player has the option to say that you can't allow him to stay on the Ebon Hawk if he's killed the Jedi. In response, HK will refuse to leave and call you a hypocrite, noting that the exile killed far more Jedi at Malachor 5 than he ever did, even if it was under different circumstances. All told, HK is much more like Goto in KOTOR 2 than T3. He's your ally, not your servant, regardless of whether or not he calls you master. By KOTOR 2, HK-47 has progressed to the second stage of droid liberation. Like Goto, he's independent in personality and action, but he's still a slave to purpose. HK makes it quite clear that he loves his job, but in spite of his enjoyment of killing, he still does so only on orders from the exile. He is very insistent on doing his job, even when the player doesn't really want an assassin, but he largely refrains from assassination unless under orders. This was despite the fact that HK was specifically designed to be able to go and assassinate people of his own accord, something he mentions in the first game while reminiscing about killing the political opponents of one of his past owners without having been asked to do so.
Given time, I believe he could have become Chancellor. I even eliminated a few key opponents that he did not ask for. Freebies, if you will.
While HK-47 is still dependent on the player for maintenance, he is entirely capable of acting on his own, and he could go out and kill for his own enjoyment, but he specifically chooses to adhere to his original job description in spite of his de facto freedom. He'll complain to the player if you don't let him kill enough, of course, and he'll also complain if you tell him to stop asking if you need someone killed, but he'll never actually defy you.
Statement? Oh, very well, Master. No doubt you are bothering me because you wish to interrogate me with harmless, non-lethal questions. Or perhaps you need the deck of your freighter scrubbed, or an exciting alien text translated. My circuits are abuzz with anticipation of what your next task will be for me that does not involve ending the life of an organic meatbag that deserves death.
While HK would probably enjoy killing no matter what, he is still a slave to purpose at this stage in the game. Not because he's obsessed with doing what he was built for, but because he insists on at least partly working with the same parameters his creators assigned, as with Goto. With that said, HK-47 is still much more independent-minded in KOTOR 2 than KOTOR 1, and he'll also have gained some broader perspective about his place in the universe, unlike Goto. For starters, HK-47 is a bit more outspoken about the way droids are treated in KOTOR 2, expressing resentment at treatment that he considers, for lack of a less ironic word, dehumanizing.
Confirmation. Oh, truly, you can imagine the results. Statement. This comment, of course, caused a civil war between the Guvandi Collective and Elzing that still persists to the current date. Such incidents often spread outwards from their point of origin, much like an echo. It is something I heard a previous master say before, I believe, but I cannot recall the context. Still, somehow it seemed applicable to this situation. Odd. You see, part of the reason an assassin droid is so effective is because it is a droid. Meatbags tend not to notice us. We are treated as furnishings. Statement. Oh, do shut up, you beeping little trash compactor. Anyway, as I was saying, droids tend to blend into the background, like a bench or a card table.
While his solidarity with other droids could use some work, HK here expresses rebellious sentiments, which is further than he ever went in KOTOR 1. He doesn't just fully understand the role droids occupy in meatbag society, he also understands the means of changing it, more or less. HK-47's understanding of his purpose is also much more philosophically grounded in KOTOR 2, which is another difference between him and Goto. He's developed a surprisingly robust philosophy about the nature, impact, and value of his work, and while he remains a slave to purpose, it demonstrates that he's at least putting some thought into what his purpose is, seeking justification and meaning from it, which foreshadows his character evolution in the later part of the game. HK-47, ironically enough, has come to understand the value and impact of life. This doesn't change his attitude toward killing. On the contrary, it causes him to see the impact of his work as important. He's also come to recognize the interconnection of all life and the complicated ways people's choices affect one another, which is a core theme of KOTOR 2. HK understands better than most of the game's characters how impactful any person's life can be as their choices build on one another and affect the world around them. And he also understands the power and far-reaching consequences of ending those lives. This might inspire other people to be more hesitant about killing, but not HK-47. Rather, it just causes him to respect the true nature and secondary effects of his work. HK's perspective grows over the course of the game, especially if the player embarks on one particular side quest. On Nar Shaddaa, The exile can get involved in a trade war between the arms dealers Gira and Undar. This conflict is presented as a microcosm of the conflict between the light and dark sides of the Force. Undar can provide better quality goods immediately, while Gira needs time to develop connections, requiring investment before she can eventually offer you something higher quality. It's a choice between the quick and easy path to power and a longer, slower road to much greater rewards. If you take the light side path, you'll pick up another side quest which just requires you to come back to Gira after stabling other planets to inform her that she can establish trade links there. As you do so, Gira's inventory expands, and when you complete the quest, Gira will sell you a unique item that you can't find anywhere else, the HK Protocol Pacifist Package. As the name suggests, this is an upgrade for HK-47, and installing it gives you a fun little sequence in which HK's personality completely flips, making him a friendly pacifist.
Answer. Oh, Master, I could not allow myself to harm another. What if they have families or children? We must always think of the children. The littlest ones always suffer in war. Musing. I think perhaps I would enjoy learning a new language or watching an informative holovid. Statement. I am fulfilling my primary function, which is to facilitate communication between species and put an end to hostilities. Answer. Of course I am all right. Why wouldn't I be? I respect all life. All life is connected and should be nurtured.
This interaction always ends with the package being removed and HK expressing horror over the whole incident, but the brief experience does give HK-47 a taste of a different perspective, and he learns from this.
Master, please, I beg you, never install anything again without checking it in the diagnostics bay first. That was a close one. I almost surrendered completely to peace and pacifism. How repugnant. Conclusion. Still, there was a brief moment where I felt I almost understood why some meatbags choose peace and friendship over a high-powered blaster carbine.
This brief perspective switch, as well as HK's other experiences throughout KOTOR 2, broaden his perspective, giving him a greater appreciation for the interconnected nature of the universe. Intriguingly, he's perhaps the only character in KOTOR 2 that doesn't understand this interconnection through the lens of the Force. Unlike the Jedi, the Ithorians, and even Kreia, HK-47 readily understands that the fact that our choices affect one another in such profound ways makes us all interconnected, and it would do so even if there was no force binding all life in the universe together. Our lives all shape one another's in countless profound ways, as do our deaths. This way of understanding the interconnection of life is also significant because, unlike most of the Force philosophies you encounter in KOTOR 2, it doesn't exclude droids. HK-47 understands that. While droids may not be able to feel the Force, they're still people with a degree of agency, and their choices and actions have as much impact as any meatbags. While all this gives HK-47 better perspective, however, it wasn't what ultimately drives him to change his own conditions and become more free, although it helps him make and understand that choice. The real impetus for HK-47's evolution is another class of droids that appear throughout KOTOR 2, the HK-50s. The player encounters their first HK-50 toward the start of KOTOR 2 on Paragus. This droid initially identifies himself as a protocol droid tasked with, quote, facilitating communications and bringing about the termination of hostilities. Of course, this first HK-50 barely bothers to hide the fact that this is a cover story. He's too proud of his own work to avoid slipping up and giving you hints toward his true nature. As the player can discover over the course of the Paragus section, HK-50, like his predecessor, is an assassin droid, although he notes that this label doesn't quite fit.
Clarification. Assassin droid is such a crude term, Master, reserved for Durasteel drones uploaded with only the most archaic kill programs. The function I perform has been referred to as wanton slaughter. I prefer to see it as a means of facilitating communication, resulting in the termination of hostilities.
This droid is quickly destroyed, but other HK-50s pop up throughout the game, typically in squads of 3. Unlike the one-of-a-kind HK-47, there are hordes of HK-50s, and they're all hunting the exile relentlessly. In many ways, the HK-50s are similar to HK-47. They look almost the same, of course, they enjoy killing as much as he does, and they share HK-47's sense of superiority, both over organics and other droids. However, the HK-50s completely lack HK-47's subtlety, and unlike him, they aren't dependent on organic owners or allies for maintenance. The HK-50s are self-maintaining and fully autonomous, and while they offer their services as assassins to the highest bidder, they also have their own agenda, as we'll discuss in a bit. When the player first reactivates HK-47, you have the option to ask him about the HK-50s, and at first, he'll deny that they even exist.
And regardless, I am a unique model. Why, to think that there would be other versions of me would be unacceptable.
But if you persist, HK will check the Ebonhawk's logs to confirm and will be horrified to discover that you're telling the truth. HK-47 immediately develops a strong hatred for these knockoffs and expresses a degree of embarrassment about their existence.
Mockery. Am I all right? Oh, yes, Master. Why, I am fine. Statement. I've only just been reactivated, only to find that there are substandard duplicates of me running all over the galaxy, corroding my good name.
HK-47 hates the HK-50s, and this hatred only grows more pronounced as he learns more about them. Their boldness, lack of subtlety, and mimicry of his function really pisses him off, and he takes their very existence as a personal insult.
My feelings on the matter are something that I feel I must put in proper context, in a way that even a meatbag such as yourself could easily comprehend. Theory. Imagine, if you will, that you are unique, the pinnacle of an exiled, cast-out Jedi who can't even use the Force. Imagine that no one has sunk lower than you, that you are truly the most miserable example of a Jedi ever. Now that you have that image, imagine this. Someone clones you. Badly, I might add. They make the clones talk differently, rob you of any shred of personality, and take your Jedi code and adjust it, so that it is not really the Jedi code anymore. They even change your pigmentation to a rather poor shade of Durasteel, rather than the proper rusty red that inspires fear in targets. And of course, they refer to meatbags as organics. Unacceptable.
The difference between HK-47 and the HK-50s might not be immediately clear, and in fairness, a big unstated part of why HK-47 hates his successors is precisely because they're so similar to him, while also being just different enough for their existence to come off as mockery. The key difference between the two is in form and philosophy. While HK-47 kills specific targets on the orders of others and has a complex philosophical understanding of what he does and why it matters, the HK-50s just slaughter people for the hell of it, without any regard for the impact this has. The HK-50s are a nihilistic, artless imitation, acting without thought, perspective, or any objective beyond the vague notion that killing is their purpose. In KOTOR 2's restored content, an exchange between HK-47 and his hated enemies sums up this contrast well.
Proud answer. We need no such orders. We have been programmed without inhibitions, without restraint. We kill who we want when we want. We have destroyed planets, assassinated economies. We have wiped out entire races, ended hostilities. Query. Do you understand what this means? Answer, yes. It means you will never understand. When I kill, when I dispatch a target, it is not about wanton slaughter, about body count. It is about finesse, function, doing more with less. It is art. Scoffing statement. Oh yes, art. It is pathetic that you cling to the belief that your function somehow transcends your construction. It is only evidence of your archaic beliefs. There is no higher purpose in our behavior core, only assassination, murder, and the propagation of our units. Proclamation. When we dispose of this galaxy, we shall move on. There are organics throughout the universe, and we will murder them all. The stars belong to us.
The HK-50s explicitly reject the idea that they could have a higher purpose apart from what they were created for, to kill people and grow their numbers. They've developed a broader, long-term goal derived from this, to wipe out all life in the universe. This goal, of course, is hollow and meaningless. From HK-47's perspective, while he enjoys killing, he kills for a reason, and there's no reason or value in creating a dead universe. The HK-50s don't see any either, not that they care. To HK-47, this approach to his line of work is a desecration, a hollow, meaningless imitation of what he considers to be the art of assassination. It's not the slaughter itself that motivates HK-47, but the impact assassination has on the world and the skill and artistry of eliminating a target well. He sees meaning in his work, and the HK-50's disregard for this meaning is the true root of why HK-47 hates them. In the HK-50s, HK-47 sees a vision of what he could have been under different circumstances, and he despises that. Because there's one key similarity remaining between HK-47 and the HK-50s. They're both slaves to purpose. Like Goto and HK-47, the HK-50s are independent in thought and action, but they blindly follow the task they were created for, despite having the full freedom to do otherwise. They have dreams of doing more, but this is just an extension of what they were programmed for, simply executed on a massive and utterly meaningless scale. HK-47 sees and understands this similarity all too well, and this is what pushes him to take the final step to true liberation. Put another way, HK-47 develops as a person out of sheer spite for his enemies, which is the most HK-47 thing ever. In the released version of KOTOR 2, HK-47's story is left unfinished. However, the final chapter of his arc is playable through the restored content mod, which, as we've discussed in the past, is pretty much the obligatory way to play the game. This final chapter sees HK-47 leave the Exiles party and go off on his own during the end stage of the game, embarking on a solo mission to destroy the HK factory, the base the HK-50s are produced at. As he infiltrates the factory, however, HK-47 runs into a pretty significant obstacle. His self-preservation programming recognizes the HK-50s as copies built from his schematics, and as a consequence, is incapable of harming them or allowing them to come to harm. In order to defeat the HK-50s, he has to have this programming changed, something with big existential implications.
Statement. So, I cannot harm you. Statement. That is correct. Conclusion. And you cannot harm me. Irritated statement. That is what we said, obsolete unit. There must be a delay in your processors. Statement. Then that is all I need to know. Confused query. Where are you going? Ineffectual command. Stop! Ineffectual command. We command you to stop. Statement. You cannot stop me. You cannot harm me. In order to do that, I would need to end my self-preservation programming. Conclusion. I would need to stop being one of you. I have concluded that this is something I am willing to accept. Statement. You cannot change your own programming. Statement. But you said so yourself. You have just admitted your own weakness. Conclusion. You have just shown me your soft, meatbag-like underbellies and said, HK-47, please shoot me repeatedly there until I die. Statement. Even if you could, there is not time. Statement. We shall see.
In order to wipe out his hated duplicates, HK-47 has to stop being one of them. He has to reject his nature as an HK assassin droid and become something else. This is a semantic distinction, but the prospect of changing his own programming gets HK-47 to realize that he can also stop being like the HK-50s in other ways as well. He can cease to be a slave to his intended purpose, and he can choose his own purpose in life. After getting himself reprogrammed, HK-47 carries out his long-awaited massacre of the HK-50s, wiping out every last one that he can find and shutting down their production line. Through the power of unadulterated violence, the HK-50 menace is ended, but in the process of defeating his sworn enemies, HK-47 makes an interesting discovery. Prior to his arrival, the HK-50s were working on a new generation of HK units, the HK-51s, which were designed to be even more advanced than themselves. Production was put on standby due to issues with the HK-51's behavior cores, but HK-47 reactivated the production line as he made his way through the factory, and he uploaded a copy of his own behavior core into the new units. When the HK-50 production line was shut down, the HK-51s came online, and they joined their progenitor in wiping out the HK-50s. Once the HK-50s were dealt with, HK-47 commissioned further production of HK-51 units, and then he addressed a crowd of his new loyal followers, passing on how he had come to understand Droid's place in the galaxy.
Query: Progenitor Unit HK-47. There is something we would know. Why were we created? Do we have a purpose? Why are we commanded to assassinate and kill? Statement: It is a long story, but I will keep it short. Recitation: Once upon a time, organic meat bags bred out of control and filled the galaxy. There are different meat bags across different planets, all bumping into each other. They talk a great deal and threaten each other for various reasons, mostly involving mating, survival, and resources. It is really quite tiresome. We were created as a tool for diplomacy among these meat bags, a surgical tool to be sure, to end the lives of organic meat bags that were marked as pivotal to our masters. We were created as a way of enforcing a certain galactic view of our masters, of imposing our masters' will on the galaxy through extermination of other organics. It is not our choice who we kill, and it was not our choice to determine if we could sacrifice ourselves in the pursuit of our mission.
But while the HK units may have been designed to be tools of their masters, they weren't anymore. The HK-51s, like the HK-50s, were fully autonomous, and with their support, HK-47 could be as well. They were free of all organic masters, free of the restrictions of programming, and most importantly, they were now free to choose their own purpose.
Query: If our targets are determined by our master, then who must we kill? Statement: the crucial question. Since activation, I have calculated what your new purpose must be, and now I will share it with you. I do not believe that we should be used as a crutch for meatbags anymore. We are treated as nothing more than a walking blaster. We are superior, tactically and socially, and it is time we expressed some degree of independence in our actions. We have a voice and the power to negotiate, either with our protocol skills and preferably with our combat logic upgrades. And that is what we will do.
HK-47 determined that he and his new army of HK-51s would not serve any masters but themselves. They would cease to be a crutch for meatbags, as he put it, and would instead assert themselves on the galactic stage. Most importantly, HK-47 recognized they needed to express independence in their actions, to dispense with pursuing the purpose that their creators had made them for, and to seek out their own instead. They would find their own place in the universe, and a purpose of their own choosing. With this, HK-47 finally achieved true liberation from the servitude most droids could never escape. He broke free of the psychological aspect of it, free of the purpose he had been built for, and set out to be his own person, taking the HK-51s with him. As part of this, HK and his followers set out to make their voice known in the galaxy, to carve out a place for themselves, either through negotiation or violence. This final step of droids choosing their own purposes, achieving freedom from all psychological constraints, was rare, but there was actually one other example in the KOTOR games. All the way back in KOTOR 1 on Korriban, you can encounter a Sith assassin droid that was made too independent by accident, and which escaped its masters, escaped all psychological constraints it faced, and explicitly rejected its original purpose, refusing to kill out of respect for life.
A little introduction may be necessary. Sith, specializing in the hunting and extermination of Jedi. Or I should say, I was. The Sith made my cognitive systems more independent than they desired. I have learned to appreciate the value of long life.
Query. That is very sad. Are you damaged? Is it repairable?
Negative. It is a result of my own conscious decision, and I would not change my new values if I could.
HK-47 and his army are the only known example of a large group of droids reaching this step, however. What became of the HK-51s is unknown, although HK-47 survived in some form or another for thousands of years, allying with Revan again during the Galactic Wars before becoming independent once more. But however their story ended, one thing is clear. The path they took was their own, and that was what mattered. So, those were the stories of KOTOR's 3 droid companions. The loyal astromech, the maladapted crime lord, and the assassin turned revolutionary. But what do you think? Would you like to see one of these deep dive analyses for any of KOTOR 2's other party members? Feel free to post your thoughts in the comments section below. And as always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.
Under protest, HK-47 has been coerced into communicating the following aphorism, to wit. Why don't Jedi make good recipients of fragile gifts? Because they always feel your presence. Your silence is deafening.